The Pacific Northwest has always been a place of contrasts. Majestic forests rising into low-hanging clouds, rivers snaking through quiet towns, and a calmness so deep it feels untouched by the modern world. But in the early 1980s, that tranquility began to fracture. Beneath the green canopy and along the muddy banks of the Green River, something malignant was beginning to take root, a danger that moved through the night with calm precision, hunting in silence, and leaving behind a trail of victims that no one could explain. This is the story of America's most prolific serial killer, a man who operated in plain sight, a killer who blended into the community, so invisible that it took investigators nearly 2 decades to stop him. This is the story of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. On July 15, 1982, the calm waters of the Green River hid a secret. A group of young boys exploring the riverbank near Kent, Washington, stumbled upon a sight that would alter the course of criminal history. Floating just beneath the surface was the body of a young woman. She was later identified as Wendy Lee Caulfield, only 16 years old. Police hoped it was an isolated tragedy. They were wrong. Within weeks, more bodies surfaced, always near water, always discarded with cold detachment. Each discovery deepened the fear spreading across King County. These were not natural deaths. They were targeted, methodical, and hauntingly consistent. Women, often young, often vulnerable, began vanishing from Seattle streets. Many were last seen in the city's red light districts, areas filled with transience, anonymity, and danger. For detectives, patterns began to crystallize. The victims were typically women involved in sex work. Many were last seen along Pacific Highway South. Their bodies were dumped in clusters, usually near the Green River or in remote wooded areas. But the most chilling pattern wasn't just in the locations. It was in the calmness, the restraint. Whoever was committing these murders was confident, organized, and comfortable, returning to the same hunting grounds again and again. Before long, the case had a name: the Green River Murders. By 1983, fear had become a constant companion for women in King County. Parents warned daughters not to walk alone. Sex workers traveled in pairs or abandoned the streets altogether. And the police, outnumbered, overwhelmed, and under pressure, formed one of the largest serial killer task forces in American history. Detective Dave Reichert, a young and determined investigator, would become one of the case's central figures. The task force had dozens of detectives, analysts, crime scene specialists, FBI behavioral experts, a mountain of files and evidence. Yet despite this army of professionals, the killer stayed one step ahead. Bodies continued to appear, sometimes in remote clusters of 3 or 4 at a time. The pace was relentless. Throughout these years of terror, life went on in Seattle. People worked, shopped, drove the same highways where the killer hunted. And in that daily routine moved a man so ordinary, so unassuming, that he attracted almost no attention at all: Gary Ridgway, a quiet truck painter, married, soft-spoken, a man who attended church, held steady jobs, and even appeared helpful or polite to neighbors. He wasn't a shadowy figure hiding in the forest darkness. He was the man next door, the co-worker, the guy at the grocery store checkout line. This normality, this camouflage, allowed the killings to continue for years. As the investigation expanded, so did the list of missing women. Some were found. Others would remain missing for decades. It became clear that the Green River Killer wasn't just a murderer. This was someone operating at a scale law enforcement had rarely seen. Investigators believed the true number of victims could be 40, 50, 60, or even more. There were moments when the task force felt they weren't hunting a single killer, but an entire network. The idea of one man doing this seemed impossible, but the truth was darker. It was just one man, and he was getting bolder. Unlike many serial killers who operate in fixed patterns, Ridgway adapted. When the police became more active on the streets, he changed his dumping grounds. When investigators patrolled Pacific Highway South, he shifted to new hunting locations. When the media heightened coverage, he vanished for short periods, waiting for pressure to drop. His flexibility kept him ahead. His low profile kept him invisible, and his lack of ego made him harder to catch. No taunting letters, no calls to police, no media games. He killed for control, not attention, and that made him even more terrifying. As the years passed, fear became part of local culture. Women refused to hitchhike, patrol cars became a constant sight. Tips came in by the thousands, each one raising hopes and then crashing them. Newspapers ran frequent updates, often grim and exhausted. The headlines grew heavier. Another body found near Green River. Police fear serial killer in Seattle area. Task force overwhelmed by rising victim count. For many residents, the Green River Killer became a legend, a faceless, unstoppable ghost, a monster people whispered about but rarely discussed openly. Yet behind the scenes, detectives kept pushing, one clue at a time, one suspect at a time, one footprint, fiber, or fingerprint at a time. It might shock many viewers to learn this. Detectives actually spoke to Gary Ridgway early in the investigation. He was briefly a person of interest. His name appeared in police files. He was even interviewed in 1984. But with no DNA technology, no eyewitnesses, no clear physical evidence, and a suspect who appeared calm and cooperative, there was no solid reason to arrest him, so Ridgway walked free, and he continued the killings. This would become one of the task force's greatest regrets, and one of the reasons the case stretched across nearly 2 decades. Ridgway's victim profile was deliberate. He targeted individuals who were transient, vulnerable, less likely to be reported missing, immediately moving through areas where anonymity was the norm. This made the investigation even harder. The task force often didn't know a woman was missing until weeks later. By then, crime scenes were cold, evidence washed away by rain, the trail buried under layers of time and weather. Ridgway depended on this. He weaponized his environment. By the late 1980s, the Green River Task Force became one of the largest and most expensive investigations in U.S. history. Leads came in from across the country. Tips poured through phone lines every day. But even with resources stretched to their limits, the killer continued to evade capture. Some detectives burned out. Others retired. Still others became emotionally consumed by the case. The weight of the victims, their families, their stories, their silence, became a constant presence. The task force felt responsible for every new discovery, every new body, every name added to the growing list. And meanwhile, Ridgway lived his quiet, ordinary life. He went to work, had relationships, smiled in photographs, and no one suspected that this unremarkable man was one of the deadliest killers in American history. By the early 1990s, the murders slowed, not because Ridgway had changed, but because time changes everything. Victim access became harder, police presence increased, DNA science began to evolve. New investigators approached the case with fresh eyes. Ridgway was still living in the Seattle area, still employed, still unnoticed. He may have believed he had gotten away with it, but the investigation wasn't over. It was evolving, quietly, patiently, and relentlessly. The pieces were finally starting to move in the right direction. The Pacific Northwest changed in the 1990s. The skyline grew taller, the suburbs spread outward. New technology transformed the world faster than most people could keep up with. But in the evidence lockers of King County, nothing changed. Boxes of files, photographs, fibers, and witness statements sat quietly, waiting. The Green River case had become one of the largest cold investigations in American history. For years, detectives studied the same clues, held the same photographs, and spent long nights reviewing interviews that felt like dead ends. But the world outside was evolving, and buried inside that evolution was the key they had been waiting for. In the early 1980s, when Wendy Caulfield's body was found, DNA forensics barely existed. Police could collect biological material, but they couldn't truly analyze it. At best, they could make general comparisons. Nothing precise, nothing definitive. But by the mid-1990s, science took a leap. DNA technology that once required large, clean samples could now extract information from materials so small it had previously been dismissed. Evidence that had been boxed and forgotten was suddenly valuable again. And in the Green River case, detectives had plenty of old evidence: fibers, hair, traces, clothing, biological material, once useless, now held new potential. Detectives began quietly re-examining every piece. This wasn't a moment of celebration. It was a moment of haunted determination. After decades of waiting, they could finally see a path forward. When detectives pulled old files to be reprocessed, the computer spat out a familiar name: Gary Ridgway. He had been interviewed back in 1984. He had passed a polygraph test. He had been calm, helpful, and forgettable. But he was also frequently seen in areas where victims disappeared, known to pick up sex workers linked to multiple witness sightings. And now, with DNA advancing, he was added back into the pool of suspects, quietly, with no attention. Just another name in a massive database. Detectives didn't yet know how important that decision was. The task force was restructured. New leadership stepped in. Younger investigators joined, bringing sharper focus and fewer emotional ties than those who had spent years buried in the case. They approached it with a new question: what have we overlooked? They began remapping everything. Every dump site, every victim timeline, every potential suspect route, every buried clue in thousands of pages of notes. Ridgway's name continued to appear. Not prominently, not suspiciously, but consistently. He fit the correct window. He lived in the correct area. He worked within miles of the disappearance zones. He wasn't a prime suspect yet, but he was climbing the list. Years earlier, a forensic analyst noticed something odd. Several victims had microscopic paint particles on their clothing, but the technology wasn't advanced enough to interpret it properly. Now, with improved microscopes and chemical analysis, the task force made a breakthrough. The particles matched a specific type of automotive paint used in truck factories. Ridgway worked at a truck painting facility. He had access to the exact paint found on the victims. This wasn't a confession, it wasn't a smoking gun, but it was the first real link connecting Ridgway to multiple victims. Detectives took notice. FBI profilers revisited Ridgway's old interview tapes. They reviewed how he spoke, how he paused, how he described his habits. Their assessment was chilling. Ridgway fit the behavioral profile with uncanny accuracy, not just as a possible suspect, but as a high-probability offender. He was organized, methodical, emotionally detached, calm, under pressure, capable of living a double life, comfortable in the exact environments where victims vanished. Investigators stopped viewing him as one of many. He was now someone of real interest. The net wasn't closing yet, but it was tightening. In the early 2000s, detectives made a critical decision. They put Gary Ridgway under quiet surveillance. This wasn't dramatic. There were no flashing lights, no raids, no public pressure, just slow, methodical tracking. His routines, his workplace, his movements, his contacts, his vehicle routes. They followed him calmly, blending in like shadows. Ridgway couldn't know that the quiet life he built was beginning to crack. In 2001, nearly 2 decades after the first murder, the lab delivered a result that would change everything. Biological material collected from several victims, material kept sealed for years in cold storage, was tested using advanced DNA methods. The results came back with a match: Gary Leon Ridgway. The DNA wasn't weak, it wasn't partial, it wasn't maybe. It was a direct, undeniable link to multiple victims. This was the moment the task force had waited for. All the years, all the dead ends, all the frustration, all the fear. It all converged into a single, silent realization. They had found the Green River Killer. Once the DNA match hit, everything changed. Detectives shifted from surveillance to strategy. This wasn't just about arresting him. It was about ensuring he could never escape justice. They needed airtight evidence, full chain of custody, quiet coordination, near-flawless timing. If they moved too soon, the case could collapse. If they moved too late, Ridgway could vanish. So they prepared carefully. They watched him for days, studied his patterns, mapped the safest possible arrest location. And then, on November 30th, 2001, the moment arrived. On a quiet afternoon, Ridgway finished his shift at the truck painting plant. As he walked toward his pickup truck, detectives and uniformed officers closed in around him. The arrest wasn't chaotic. There was no resistance, no attempt to flee, no dramatic scene. Ridgway was calm, eerily calm, as officers placed cuffs around his wrists. For nearly 20 years, the Green River Killer had remained invisible. Now he was finally exposed. News of the arrest spread rapidly across Washington state. For many, the emotional response was overwhelming. Families who had waited decades for answers saw a spark of hope. Retired detectives who had carried the case on their shoulders finally felt relief, mixed with grief for the lives lost. The public struggled to comprehend the truth behind the man being shown on television. A quiet, average-looking truck painter, married, soft-spoken, living in a modest home in the suburbs. This was a monster who had haunted the Pacific Northwest. People asked, how could this man kill so many? How did he fool everyone? Why didn't anyone see it? The answers would come soon, and they would be disturbing. As investigators questioned Ridgway, his demeanor remained calm, not defensive, not emotional, not confused, just flat. He acknowledged being with sex workers, acknowledged visiting the areas where victims disappeared, acknowledged multiple interactions with individuals who were later found dead. But what struck detectives most was the absence of remorse. Ridgway spoke in the same tone one might use to describe an ordinary day. He didn't brag. He didn't panic. He simply existed in a state of unsettling normality. The evidence was strong, but the case was enormous. Dozens of victims, multiple counties, years of missing person files, mountains of evidence that needed processing. Prosecutors feared a trial could last years, maybe longer, and still leave questions unanswered. Families could be forced to relive their trauma indefinitely, so they made a strategic decision. They offered Ridgway a deal. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he would confess to every murder he committed, in detail, and lead investigators to undiscovered remains. Ridgway accepted. This moment would reveal truths darker than investigators imagined. When the interviews resumed, Ridgway spoke with precision. He provided locations, timelines, methods, victim details, directions to undiscovered remains. His confessions were not emotional. They were cold, matter-of-fact, methodical. As if he were reading from a list, he confessed to 48 murders initially, later admitting to more. Some investigators believe the true number may approach 70 or even higher. This wasn't just a serial killer. This was one of the deadliest murderers in modern history. When the full extent of Ridgway's crimes became public knowledge, it shook America. He had lived a normal life, maintained consistent employment, married multiple times, blended into neighborhoods, smiled in photographs, and killed more victims than nearly any serial killer on record. The contrast between the ordinary exterior and the monstrous truth beneath it created a chilling legacy. Evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. When Gary Ridgway began confessing, investigators prepared themselves. They expected lies. They expected contradiction. They expected manipulation. What they didn't expect was cooperation. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the Green River Killer spoke openly. And the words he offered revealed a world far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. Ridgway didn't stalk his victims with cinematic flair. He didn't hide in shadows. He didn't chase. He didn't abduct in dramatic fashion. His approach was much simpler and far more deadly. Ridgway targeted women society ignored, sex workers, runaways, vulnerable individuals surviving on the outskirts of Seattle life. He knew their routines. He knew their struggles. He knew they were unlikely to be reported missing immediately. He blended in with the men they interacted with every night. He used charm, routine, and a calm voice to win trust. That trust, even for a moment, was enough. Ridgway described pulling over, offering a ride, and acting polite. He appeared safe, quiet, approachable. He made himself forgettable, and that invisibility became his greatest weapon. Ridgway explained that he preferred comfort zones, specific wooded areas near the Green River hidden clearings, quiet back roads, places where he wouldn't be interrupted. He returned to these locations again and again, establishing a routine that allowed him to navigate the terrain effortlessly in the dark. These sites weren't random. They were chosen with precision, easy vehicle access, dense tree coverage, soft soil for concealment, natural barriers blocking sound. Ridgway spoke of these locations with unsettling familiarity, as if describing ordinary landmarks he used every day. During confessions, investigators noticed something chilling. Ridgway never displayed anger, never raised his voice, never expressed sadness or remorse. He spoke with the composure of someone describing tasks, not crimes. He said he killed to feel control. He killed because it was easy. He killed because, for a moment, it made him feel powerful. But most disturbing of all, he admitted he often returned to the bodies, not out of guilt, but out of possession. This detail sent shockwaves through investigators who had worked the case for decades. It confirmed long-held suspicions about the nature of the crime scenes. Ridgway's cooperation required something rare in law enforcement: multiple agencies working in complete coordination. The confession task force included King County detectives, FBI profilers, forensic teams, crime scene analysts, prosecutors, anthropologists, search and rescue units. The team spent months traveling with Ridgway to remote locations, each step calculated, cautious, and emotionally draining. Each time he stopped walking and pointed into the forest, there was a moment of suspended breath. Investigators would look at the ground, the trees, the soil, hoping this was the place where answers finally lay. Some locations matched previously discovered victims, others led to new remains, and some, after so many years, had changed too much to confirm anything. As Ridgway guided teams through brush, over ridges, and into thick forests, the reality of his crimes took physical form. Searchers uncovered bone fragments, clothing fibers, small personal items, jewelry, the remains of women whose families had searched for decades. The forest had tried to reclaim what had been hidden, but time could not erase everything. For every discovery, investigators experienced a complex mix of relief and grief. Relief that another family might finally receive answers. Grief that the answers came too late. While some families welcomed the confessions as long-delayed closure, others felt an entirely different emotion: a new wave of heartbreak. Ridgway's cold, detached explanation of their daughter's last moments was more brutal than anything they had prepared for. Many families chose not to hear the details, others felt compelled to know everything, and some still hold unanswered questions that Ridgway either could not or would not provide. The justice system could convict him, but it could never repair what was taken. By the end of the investigation, Ridgway had admitted to 48 murders, the official number in the court record. But in more candid moments, he indicated the real number was higher, much higher. He told investigators he lost count. He suggested he stopped keeping track around 70. He implied some victims would never be found. Forensic analysts believe the true count may indeed exceed 70, making Ridgway one of the deadliest serial killers in modern history. On December 18, 2003, the King County courtroom was packed. Families filled the benches. Journalists lined the walls. Detectives who had spent entire careers on the case sat silently, waiting. Ridgway entered with the same calm demeanor he displayed throughout his arrest and confession. He pled guilty to 48 murders. The judge addressed him directly, describing his crimes as vicious, cold-blooded, and beyond comprehension. Ridgway showed no emotion. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 48 consecutive life sentences, one for each known victim. Each sentence was delivered slowly, deliberately, as the courtroom listened in heavy silence. When it was over, Ridgway was led away without fanfare. There were no last words, no remorse, no final moments of drama, just the quiet removal of a man who had wreaked havoc on the Pacific Northwest for 2 decades. The Green River murders left a permanent mark on American criminal history. The investigation drove advancements in DNA technology, interagency collaboration, geographic profiling, evidence preservation. It set new precedents in how cold cases are handled and how forensic science evolves over time. But beyond the scientific and investigative breakthroughs, the case left something else. A cultural scar, a reminder of how someone so ordinary could commit acts so monstrous. Ridgway was not the shadowy villain people imagined. He was the neighbor next door, the quiet worker at the paint plant, the man who waved at people while mowing his lawn. This reality forced America to confront a difficult truth. Evil can hide in plain sight. Even today, investigators occasionally re-examine old missing person cases from the early 1980s. Families still wonder if their loved one was one of Ridgway's unnamed victims. Though Ridgway sits behind bars, aging and isolated, the search for answers continues. Some victims still haven't been identified. Some may never be found. And some families continue to wait for a discovery that may never come. The case is considered solved, but it will never be complete. Gary Ridgway once told investigators something that has echoed through the halls of law enforcement ever since. "I killed so many women, I can't remember the number." Those words encapsulate the cruelty of the Green River Killer. Not only the scale of his violence, but the utter absence of humanity behind it. The Green River case stands today as one of the darkest chapters in American history, a combination of tragedy, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of justice. And though Ridgway will die in prison, his crimes remain a chilling reminder of how fragile safety can be and how important it is to remember the victims whose lives were stolen. The early 1990s marked a turning point in the Green River investigation. The fear and exhaustion that had haunted King County for a decade had not faded. It had simply become quieter, heavier, and more deeply embedded in the community. The killings had slowed, and headlines had shifted to new concerns. But detectives in Seattle never stopped working. The name Gary Leon Ridgway had been in their files for years. A quiet truck painter, married, stable, polite, and outwardly unremarkable. And yet, again and again, his name surfaced. In old interviews, in case notes, in polygraph logs, in sightings along Pacific Highway South, he was never ruled out, but he had never been caught. By 1990, the Green River Task Force had changed. Many original detectives had moved on. New investigators joined. Technology evolved. DNA science, barely usable in the early 1980s, was now becoming powerful enough to solve crimes once considered impossible. And that quiet shift in science would become the trap that finally tightened around Gary Ridgway. Detectives began reviewing every piece of evidence collected since 1982, thousands of pages of reports, maps, witness statements, bones, soil samples, fibers, and bags of clothing preserved from the first victims, items that had not yielded answers at the time, but could now be tested with emerging forensic technology. The Green River Task Force had been one of the most exhaustive investigations in American history. Yet many of the case's earliest pieces were still waiting for science to catch up. And in 1997, it finally did. A forensic genealogist retested samples taken from the earliest victims using improved DNA amplification. The results produced partial profiles, not enough to name a killer, but enough to compare to a suspect. They tested what they had against men long suspected, against the dozens of names that had cycled through interviews against men who had been ruled out. and against the one man whose name had never truly disappeared, Gary Ridgway. For more than a decade, Ridgway had lived freely, married again, working steadily at the same truck plant, living in a modest house in the Seattle suburbs. There were moments when he seemed almost invisible. He volunteered at church. He attended barbecues with neighbors. He was dependable, quiet, and unremarkable. To the outside world, he was forgettable. But to the King County Sheriff's Office, he was never forgotten. In 1983, a woman had reported seeing Ridgway with one of the victims shortly before she disappeared. In 1984, he had taken and passed a polygraph test. In 1987, detectives had searched his home and workplace, collecting a sample of his saliva. They had found nothing conclusive, and he slipped into the background. Now in 1997, they finally had something to compare that sample to. It was subtle at first, just a partial match, statistically significant, but not yet enough to arrest him. Detectives kept quiet, waited. They followed Ridgway's routines, noted his habits, familiarized themselves with his wife, his home, his job, his roots. And behind the scenes, forensic teams kept working, processing more evidence, retesting degraded biological material, building stronger profiles. Then slowly the answers became clearer. One match turned into two. Two became three. Three became a pattern. And by the year 2001, King County detectives had what they had waited nearly 20 years to obtain: a full DNA match linking Gary Leon Ridgway to multiple Green River victims. It was the breakthrough that investigators had dreamed of, a scientific confirmation that could not be explained away. Not a hunch, not circumstantial evidence, not a polygraph. DNA, direct, specific, undeniable. The task force prepared for the arrest. It was a cold, gray afternoon outside the Kenworth truck plant in Renton, Washington. Workers moved through their normal routines, finishing shifts, stepping outside for fresh air, unaware of what was about to unfold. Ridgway had no idea either. He walked out of the plant wearing a simple work jacket, heading toward his pickup truck. Detectives approached calmly, deliberately. This moment had been rehearsed for years. There was no chase, no struggle, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet, almost anticlimactic moment. Detectives asked him to place his hands behind his back. He complied, and the man who had eluded investigators for nearly 2 decades was placed under arrest. Co-workers stared in disbelief as Ridgway was escorted away, calm, expressionless, almost eerily passive. The news spread quickly. Gary Ridgway, a man many in his life described as ordinary, helpful, or mild-mannered, was charged with aggravated murder. But investigators believed they were just beginning to uncover the truth. Ridgway was questioned for hours. He denied everything, politely, calmly, flatly. He showed no anger, no fear, and no surprise, as though the interrogation were just a minor inconvenience. Detectives, trained to read reactions, found the lack of emotion chilling, but the evidence was overwhelming. In December 2001, Ridgway was charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder. The cases with solid DNA links, the prosecution prepared for what could have become one of the most high-profile death penalty trials in American history. But they couldn't shake the concern that these 4 cases were just the beginning. For years, investigators believed the Green River killer had murdered far more than 4 victims. And if Ridgway was the killer, he knew where the truth was buried. In 2003, prosecutors made a controversial decision. To avoid the death penalty, Gary Ridgway agreed to a full confession, in exhaustive detail, of every murder he had committed. It was a deal that sparked outrage for some, relief for others. The goal was simple: recover the truth, recover the missing, recover as many victims as possible. Ridgway accepted. What followed was one of the largest confession operations in American criminal history. Over months, detectives drove Ridgway across the region, to riverbanks, woods, quiet back roads, forgotten dumping sites. He recounted details in a monotone voice, almost mechanical, describing where he left victims and how he returned to revisit certain crime scenes. The confessions were chilling not because of theatrics or emotion, but because of the lack of both. Ridgway showed no remorse, no guilt, and no hesitation. He remembered details with disturbing clarity. And with every confession, another family finally got answers. When the investigation ended, Ridgway had confessed to 71 murders. The court convicted him of 49, making him one of the most prolific confirmed serial killers in American history. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, spared from the death penalty only due to his cooperation in identifying victims. The official number will likely never be known. Some investigators believe it could be higher. Some fear many victims will never be found. But one truth is certain: the quiet truck painter from Auburn, Washington, led a double life that shook the nation, a life hidden in plain sight, enabled by routine, normalcy, and a predatory ability to blend into the fabric of everyday life. The Green River Killer case changed policing forever. It advanced forensic science. It reshaped cold case investigations. It transformed how law enforcement approaches serial offender profiling, and it left a permanent scar on Washington state. The victims, many of them marginalized, vulnerable, or forgotten by society, became the focus of reform efforts, advocacy, and remembrance. Their names replaced the anonymity of the case's early years. Today, Gary Ridgway lives in the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, serving his life sentence. He remains unexpressive, emotionless, and consistent in the behavior that baffled detectives for decades. A man whose outward life was so ordinary that few looked twice. A man whose hidden life became one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history.